The bass drum thumped like a giant's heartbeat. Neon lights pulsed, painting the alleyway in shades of electric blue and toxic green. There, amongst the overflowing dumpsters and scurrying rats, lurked Grog, a creature of shadows and unfortunate clumsiness, short and stout, covered in moss-green fur that was always matted with something or other. He had eyes like oversized marbles, reflecting the city lights with an almost childlike innocence. An innocence that sharply contrasted with the pair of mismatched horns protruding haphazardly from his head. He craved companionship, yearned for a friendly face in the urban wilderness. Problem was, Grog had a knack for accidental mayhem. A handshake could turn bone-crushing. A friendly pat on the back could leave you gasping for air.
Ain't that about a bitch? Tonight, Grog was hungry. Not the gnawing hunger for acceptance. No, tonight it was a craving for something a little more conventional. He'd caught a whiff of something delicious wafting from a nearby food stall. Little did Grog know, this culinary craving would lead to yet another unfortunate and messy misunderstanding.
Reading wasn't Grog's forte. In fact, it was a downright nemesis. Letters squirmed on the page like agitated earthworms, refusing to make any sense. He'd tried, bless his heart, spent countless nights hunched over discarded newspapers, his brow furrowed in concentration, but the words remained a jumbled mess, taunting him with their impenetrability. He'd even attempted those learn-to-read books for youngsters, the ones with big, colorful pictures. He figured, how hard could it be? Turns out pretty darn hard when you're a monster with a limited vocabulary and a penchant for interpreting things a little too literally.
Ain't that about a bitch? So when he stumbled upon the food stall, a brightly lit oasis in the grimy alleyway, he relied on his nose, not his literacy skills. The menu, a riot of colorful fonts and mouth-watering descriptions, might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics for all the good it did Grog. Me want that.
The misunderstanding escalated with the relentless rhythm of the techno music blasting from the club across the street. The teenager, bless his cotton socks, made a fatal error. He tried to physically move Grog, to gently guide him away from the stall. Now, Grog wouldn't hurt a fly intentionally, but his understanding of personal space was flexible at best. One minute the teenager was pushing at Grog's broad chest, squeaking out something about closing time. The next, he was airborne, launched skyward with an unexpected burst of Grog's monstrous strength. It all happened so fast, a blur of motion set against the backdrop of flashing lights and pounding music. The teenager, bless his naive little heart, didn't stand a chance. He sailed through the air for what felt like an eternity, a surprised yelp escaping his lips. His trajectory, unfortunately, intersected with the neon sign advertising the club across the street. There was a sickening crunch as the sign, poorly secured and already on its last legs, gave way. It crashed down, showering the alleyway in sparks and shattered glass.
Ain't that about a bitch?
The music stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. People spilled out of the club, drawn by the commotion. Grog, usually so eager for company, shrank back into the shadows.
He knew this wouldn't end well. He'd seen enough movies to know that angry mobs and misunderstood monsters rarely mixed well. As the crowd gathered, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, a figure pushed through the throng. It was a young woman, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was looking for someone, her gaze scanning the crowd with a desperate intensity. Then she saw him, Grog, lurking at the edge of the alleyway.
There he is! That's him! He did it! The crowd turned as one, their expressions a mixture of anger, fear, and morbid curiosity. Grog braced himself for the worst. He'd been on the receiving end of enough scorn and suspicion to last a lifetime. But this time something unexpected happened.
The young woman, bless her broken heart, didn't flinch away from Grog's touch. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes wide with a strange mix of sorrow and, was that curiosity? She She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his fur. It was rough, damp, not exactly pleasant. But beneath the surface, she felt something else. A warmth, a solidity, a presence.
Why? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Why did you do it? Grog wanted to explain, to tell her it was an accident, a terrible, horrible accident. But the words, as always, failed him. He stammered, his grunts and growls conveying nothing but his own distress. Then a strange thing happened.
They danced for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The crowd, initially bewildered, slowly began to disperse. The spectacle of a grieving sister dancing with the monster who'd accidentally killed her brother, set to the thumping beat of techno music, was apparently too much for even the most morbidly curious. As the last of the onlookers drifted away, the music softened, transitioning into a slower, more melodic track. The young woman stumbled, her legs finally giving out from under her. Grog, with surprising gentleness, caught her before she hit the ground. They sat together in the now empty alleyway, surrounded by the debris of the fallen sign and the lingering aroma of spicy noodles. The young woman leaned against Grog's furry side, her breathing ragged, her tears finally subsiding.
That was something, she said, her voice barely a whisper.
Grog grunted in agreement. He didn't know what to make of it all. He'd accidentally killed her brother, and yet here they were, sitting together, united in their shared grief and their mutual love for the music that pulsed through the city like a heartbeat.
He looked down at her, and for the first time since that fateful night, he saw a flicker of something other than sorrow in her eyes. The sun rose, painting the city in shades of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the neon jungle of the night before. Grog and the young woman, their names still unspoken, sat side by side, watching the city awaken. They had talked, or rather, Grog had grunted and gestured while the young woman, bless her patient soul, had tried to decipher his meaning. She had learned about his love for music, his struggles with reading, his longing for connection. He, in turn, had learned about her brother, his love for spicy noodles, his dream of opening his own food stall. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a fragile bridge built on shared grief and unexpected laughter. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the alleyway, Grog knew it was time for him to go. He couldn't stay here, a constant reminder of the tragedy he'd inadvertently caused. He rose to his feet, his movements clumsy, his heart surprisingly heavy. He looked down at the young woman, her face pale in the morning light, her eyes red-rimmed but no longer filled with despair.
"Ain't that about a bitch?" he rumbled, his voice gruff but gentle.
She smiled, a sad but genuine smile, and nodded.
And with that, Grog turned and lumbered away, melting into the shadows, leaving the young woman to face the dawn and the daunting task of rebuilding her life.